Tell you about that landmark deal at the COP28 climate summit in Dubai. It's laid the foundation, some say, for the gradual move away from the use of fossil fuels in the most significant way. 200 countries approved with the aim of capping the rising temperatures caused by greenhouse emissions. Let's talk about the deal now with Stellenbosch University School of Climate Studies Director, Professor Midgley. A very good evening to you, Professor. Good to have your time. So, in terms of significance then, how significant a deal is this really?
Thanks very much for having me. I think this is very significant. It is the first time that this particular negotiation has included the term fossil fuel in its conclusions. And the intention is to transition away from fossil fuels, particularly this decade, to kick that off as fast as possible, to triple renewable energy capacity on the planet by 2030, and to arrive at a net zero emissions by 2050. So it really does signal a strong phase out of fossil fuels over the next few decades.
What does it mean, though, for countries such as South Africa, where we know there's still heavy reliance on coal for multiple things, not least of which in Eskom's energy mix in order to keep the lights on in the midst of an electricity crisis?
Well, it does mean that we have to, as a country, find alternatives. There's going to be, over the next years, or let's say decade and a half to a little bit longer, I think the intention is for developing countries and emerging economies to have a little bit more leeway in terms of fossil fuel use. But to be quite honest, the potential job creation opportunities and potential for spreading job opportunities in energy across the country is far higher in renewable energy. There have been many analyses of job creation potential in South Africa and in Southern Africa, and indeed in Africa in renewables. And we're talking literally in Africa up to 15 million jobs over the next few years to be created in renewable energy space.
Are we seeing the right sort of investment to get us moving in that direction? Because plans alone are great, but if there isn't money put behind the talk, it means very little.
Well, there's a number of answers to that question, but I'd first say that countries like China have already jumped on this trend, and China has probably created about 40% of the jobs in renewable energy already. So the more we delay, the more we miss out on this massive opportunity. Funding is available from the international community, but there's no reason why our central treasury should not make funding available to really stimulate this industry. The real benefit for South Africa would be to actually produce the means of producing energy, so to start to make solar panels and supply them into the region. And that if Treasury could fund that from the fiscus, there's no reason we need to borrow money to do that, because it would grow our GDP and return in taxes and create jobs. Hundreds of thousands of jobs, potentially, according to analyses.
Is it the sort of thing that would have quick turnaround in terms of seeing return on investment, and especially the much-needed creation of jobs? Because whenever we talk about phasing out fossil fuels in South Africa, the fear or the retort is that many people, many thousands of people in this country rely on those toxic fuels to make a living.
It's interesting to note that particularly in mining, more jobs would be created through following a renewable energy pathway than currently exist in the mining of coal. So, we can transition. Of course, it's got to be done in an orderly way. It's got to be intentional. But we shouldn't be using this as an excuse not to transition. The issue is that the longer we take, the more we miss out on potential opportunities. And we have to have intentionality in moving towards this future energy mix. We're going to have to do it ultimately anyway, and the later we leave it, the less we will benefit from it. So there's a real urgency to this, and the urgency is about opportunity, and it's an opportunity for the whole nation. And it would, if done correctly, it could really increase equality, massively increase. It would reduce the price of energy for all South Africans, and it would create sustainable and cleaner jobs.
And do you see a sufficient response, a fast enough response to the urgency of the hour on all fronts as far as issues around climate change, the impact on the socio-economic setup, if you will, of each individual country, especially our country?
Well, China's jumped on the bandwagon fast. I think Africa as a whole is very keen to see this transition happen. This is what was the message that came out of the African Union Summit on climate a few months ago. In South Africa, we've been a little bit slow, and we could really ramp things up and take advantage of the opportunity. The other benefits would include human health benefits, and indeed significant savings in water use, which currently our current energy production uses a lot of water for cooling and other processes in the production of energy from coal.
And just lastly then, Professor, when you look at this year's COP28 gathering in Dubai, going in, a lot of the African states were clear that they wanted to be heard. They wanted the larger countries who also emit more or have carried or caused much of the burden that we're dealing with at the moment, take responsibility, but also sort of do right, if you will, in terms of the loss and damage fund, etc. Was it a game changer as far as that, African countries taking, or the developing world really, taking its rightful seat at the table and actually being heard, and the others, mainly the West, doing right?
I think to a certain extent, yes, there is a significant ramp-up of funding going to be made available for adaptation, for loss and damage. Those negotiations are well underway and indeed concluded in the loss and damage side of things. But the two leading emitters, China and the USA, are also talking to each other behind the scenes. And indeed, both of those countries, well, the USA has significantly dropped its emissions, and China has peaked its emissions and is very likely to start dropping its emissions and becoming much more efficient. So the big emitters in the world that lead the two biggest negotiating blocs are reducing their emissions, and essentially we are now in a phase of approaching a post-fossil fuel era, and we need to be alive to that if we're going to be effective in the international trading regime.
Guy Midgley, good to speak to you. Thank you so much for your time tonight.